Part 1. Amarillo to Pasadena. The Making of a Dream. There are certain stories in Hollywood that never quite reach the surface, not because nothing happened, but because the person at the center of it chose silence over spectacle, dignity over confession. Carolyn Jones was one of those stories. To the world, she was striking, unforgettable, a face that lingered long after the screen went dark. She earned recognition, awards, and roles that would outlive generations. But behind that composed exterior was a life shaped by absence, quiet struggles, and decisions that were rarely shared. And like many stories that begin far from the spotlight, hers started in a place no one was watching. She was born on April 28, 1930, in Amarillo, Texas. Her father, Julius Jones, worked as a barber. Her mother, Chloe Jeanette Southern, managed the home, raising Carolyn and her younger sister in what could have been an ordinary life. But it didn't stay that way. When Carolyn was just 4 years old, her father walked out. No dramatic farewell, no explanation, just gone. And with that, the structure of the family collapsed quietly behind him. Carolyn, her sister, and their mother moved into the home of her maternal grandparents. It was a stable environment. Her grandfather, Charles Baker, was steady and kind. But stability doesn't erase absence. And absence, especially that early, leaves its mark. As a child, Carolyn grew inward. She wasn't the kind to gather friends or chase noise. Instead, she built a world inside her own imagination, a private place where stories lived and people stayed. There was another challenge, too. She suffered from severe asthma. It kept her indoors more often than she would have liked, separated from the rhythm of childhood that others seemed to move through effortlessly. But in that limitation, she found something unexpected: time, and she filled it with Hollywood. Magazines became her escape. She studied them, not casually, but carefully. Names, studios, careers, trajectories. She wasn't just dreaming, she was learning. Even before she fully understood how it worked, she understood one thing clearly: she was going to be part of it. By the age of 6, that idea wasn't a fantasy anymore. It was a decision. Years passed, and that quiet determination didn't fade. It sharpened. At 17, Carolyn made her first real move toward that world. She left Amarillo for California. It wasn't an easy leap, but she had something most people didn't at that age: clarity. Her grandfather supported her decision, agreeing to fund her education at the Pasadena Playhouse, one of the most respected acting schools in the country. It had trained countless performers who had gone on to build real careers. But even getting in required a small act of boldness. She reportedly lied about her age, claiming to be 18 instead of 17, not out of recklessness, out of certainty. She wasn't going to wait for permission. Once inside, she worked with a kind of focus that didn't go unnoticed: acting, voice, movement. She absorbed everything quickly, as if she had been preparing for this long before she arrived. People who trained with her noticed something unusual. She didn't just memorize lines, she became them. There was a natural ease to her performances that couldn't be taught. Something instinctive. Something already there. During school breaks, she worked in summer stock productions, gaining experience and earning what she could. It wasn't glamorous, but it was necessary. Every step mattered. By 1950, she graduated, and like many young actors stepping into Hollywood for the first time, she stood at the edge of something uncertain. But before her career truly began, her personal life made its first quiet turn. While still connected to the Playhouse, Carolyn married a fellow student, Don Donaldson. He was older, a former Air Force officer. The relationship moved quickly, and ended just as quickly. By 1951, the marriage was over. There had been no announcement, no headlines, no attention. And that was exactly how Carolyn preferred it. In fact, for much of her life, she barely spoke about it at all. It was as if that chapter had been deliberately folded away, unseen, unmentioned. But it revealed something important. Carolyn felt deeply and quickly. She was capable of giving her whole self to someone, sometimes before truly knowing who they were. And that pattern would return. But for now, she stood alone again. No marriage, no safety net. Just a goal that had been forming since childhood. To build a career in a city full of people chasing the same dream. And somewhere ahead, just out of reach, was the moment that would change everything. A talent scout, a screen test, and the first real step into Hollywood. Part 2. The first break and the first loss. The transition from training to reality in Hollywood is rarely smooth. For Carolyn Jones, it wasn't a dramatic entrance. It was quiet, uncertain, and built on moments that could have easily gone unnoticed. After graduating from the Pasadena Playhouse in 1950, she didn't step straight into stardom. She waited, worked, watched. She took a position as an understudy at the Players' Ring Theatre in Hollywood, a role that demanded patience more than recognition. Night after night, she stood just outside the spotlight, prepared but unseen. Until one night, everything shifted. The lead actress left the production unexpectedly, and Carolyn stepped in. No build-up, no rehearsal for the moment itself. Just opportunity, arriving without warning. She performed, and in the audience that night, by chance or timing, was a talent scout from Paramount Pictures. He saw something. Not perfection, but presence. Enough to arrange a screen test. And in Hollywood, a screen test is often the thin line between anonymity and arrival. Carolyn passed it. Soon after, she was offered a 6-month contract with Paramount, one of the biggest studios in the industry at the time. It was the kind of moment actors spend years waiting for. The door had opened, but what lay beyond it wasn't what she expected. Her first roles came quickly, but they came small. In 1952, she appeared in The Turning Point, uncredited. In 1953, she followed it with another appearance in The Big Heat. Again, uncredited. To most people, these roles meant very little, barely noticeable. But for Carolyn, they were footholds, proof that she was inside the system now, even if only at the edges. Then came something different, a film that would actually be seen. House of Wax, a major production. A 3D film, something still new, still exciting for audiences at the time. It starred Vincent Price, already a powerful presence on screen. And this time, Carolyn had a role people could remember. She played a young woman whose fate in the film was chilling, her character becoming one of the wax figures themselves. It wasn't a leading role, but it was visible. And visibility changes everything. Audiences noticed. Her face, her expression, it lingered. For the first time, she was attached to something people were actually talking about. It felt like movement, like progress, like the beginning of something real. And then it stopped. Just as quickly as the door had opened, it quietly closed again. Paramount didn't renew her contract. It wasn't personal. The industry was shifting. Television was beginning to pull audiences away from cinemas, and studios were cutting costs wherever they could. Contracts ended. People were released. And Carolyn was one of them. She didn't fall apart over it. She understood something that many newcomers didn't. That first opportunity is rarely the whole story. Still, She was back where she started, building again, from nothing. But what came next would be far more difficult than a lost contract, because this time, it wasn't about opportunity, it was about timing. In 1953, Carolyn came closer than ever to a role that could have changed everything. She had been cast in From Here to Eternity, a major production based on the novel by James Jones. It was a serious film, a prestigious one, the kind that defined careers. And her role, Elmer Burke, was exactly the kind of part that could have lifted her into a completely different position in Hollywood. She was ready. Everything was set. And then she got sick. Not a minor illness, not something she could push through. Pneumonia, severe enough to force her to withdraw from the film entirely. There was no workaround, no delay. The production moved on without her. The role went to Donna Reed, and what followed only deepened the loss. Donna Reed's performance was celebrated, recognized, awarded. At the 1954 Academy Awards, she won the Oscar for Best Supporting Actress. That moment, watching someone else stand on that stage, living the outcome that could have been hers, was something Carolyn understood with complete clarity. This wasn't just a missed role, it was a missed trajectory, the kind that doesn't come around often. But Carolyn didn't turn bitter. She didn't retreat. If anything, she hardened. Not emotionally, but professionally. People who knew her described her the same way again and again, not defeated, determined. She kept working, small roles, background parts, building, piece by piece. And somewhere during this stretch, this long, uncertain climb, another story began to take shape. Not on screen, but in her personal life. She met a man named Aaron Spelling. At the time, he wasn't the powerful figure he would later become. He was still finding his way, writing scripts, taking acting jobs where he could, trying to build something out of very little. In that way, they were similar, both from Texas, both outsiders in Hollywood, both chasing something that felt just beyond reach, and they connected quickly. They understood each other in a way that didn't require explanation. They could talk for hours about films, about the industry, about where they were going. There was no distance, no performance, just alignment. And Carolyn, true to her nature, didn't hesitate. She moved forward. In fact, she proposed to him, something unusual for that time. But Carolyn had never been someone who waited quietly when she knew what she wanted. Aaron said yes. They were married in April 1953. She was in her early 20s. He was nearing 30. And for a moment, it felt like balance. Two people building something side by side. A shared ambition, a shared struggle. But Hollywood doesn't always allow two careers to rise at the same pace. And slowly, almost invisibly at first, that balance began to shift. Because while Carolyn was still fighting for her place, Aaron Spelling's path was starting to move faster. And when two people begin at the same point, but don't move forward together, something always changes. Part 3. Recognition, fame, and the cracks beneath. By the mid-1950s, something began to shift for Carolyn Jones. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but steadily and unmistakably. After years of small roles, missed chances, and quiet persistence, she was finally being seen. Not just as another face in Hollywood, but as someone who could hold attention, someone who mattered. In 1956, she appeared in 2 films that placed her directly in front of audiences who were beginning to notice her. The first was Invasion of the Body Snatchers, a film that would go on to become one of the most enduring science fiction classics of its time. The second was The Man Who Knew Too Much, directed by Alfred Hitchcock and starring James Stewart and Doris Day. These weren't leading roles, but they didn't need to be. For the first time, Carolyn was part of films people remembered, films that stayed in circulation, films that gave her something far more valuable than screen time: recognition. And then, in 1957, everything changed. The film was The Bachelor Party, a modest production on the surface, adapted from a television play, focused on a group of men spending one final night together before marriage. It wasn't built around her. She wasn't the star. In fact, she appeared on screen for only a few minutes, but what she did in those minutes altered everything. She played a woman who was sharp, wounded, searching, someone whose presence carried both strength and quiet sadness. And Carolyn didn't just play the role, she transformed herself for it. She dyed her hair black, cut it short. It changed her look completely. But more importantly, it revealed something about her that had always been there: depth, control, truth. When audiences saw her in The Bachelor Party, they didn't just notice her, they remembered her. 8 minutes. That was all it took. 8 minutes to deliver a performance so precise, so fully realized, that it reached the highest level of recognition in Hollywood. She was nominated for the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actress. From the outside, it seemed almost unbelievable. From within the industry, it was undeniable. She had arrived. At the awards, the Oscar went to another performance. But the loss didn't diminish what had happened, because something even more important followed. She won the Golden Globe for Most Promising Newcomer. And suddenly, Carolyn Jones was no longer building a career in the shadows. She was standing in the light. Offers came. Opportunities widened. In 1958, she appeared in King Creole, starring Elvis Presley. At the time, Elvis wasn't just a performer. He was a phenomenon. The attention around him was massive. And yet, Carolyn held her ground. She didn't fade beside him. She matched him. Her performance carried a complexity that gave the film something more than spectacle. Then came Career in 1959, a quieter film, less commercially successful. But for those who paid attention, it revealed something deeper. This was Carolyn at her most controlled, subtle, layered, the kind of performance that doesn't demand attention, but earns it. By the early 1960s, she had established herself as something rare in Hollywood, not a conventional leading lady, not easily defined, but compelling in a way that made it impossible to look away. She could move between drama and restraint with ease. She understood character, not just from the outside, but from within. And yet, while her professional life was finding its rhythm, her personal life was beginning to fracture. Her marriage to Aaron Spelling had started with alignment. Two people chasing the same dream. Two people building something together. But over time, their paths began to separate. Not emotionally at first, professionally. Aaron Spelling's career was accelerating. What began as small writing jobs had turned into something far more significant. Television was expanding rapidly, and he had found his place within it. He was writing, producing, moving forward with a kind of momentum that was hard to ignore. And with that momentum came distance, not just in schedule, but in presence. Late nights became normal. Explanations became less clear. The rhythm of their lives, once shared, started to shift. And in relationships like this, the change rarely announces itself. It builds quietly, until it becomes impossible to ignore. Carolyn, who had spent years fighting for recognition, now found herself in a different position. She was visible, respected, but still navigating an industry that didn't always know what to do with someone like her. She wasn't the typical Hollywood image. She wasn't easy to place into a single category. And while that made her interesting, it also made her path uncertain. Meanwhile, Aaron's world was becoming more defined, more stable, more successful. The imbalance began to show. Two people who once stood side by side were no longer moving at the same pace, and that difference creates pressure. Pressure that doesn't always break things immediately, but weakens them over time. Trust began to erode, questions lingered longer than answers, and what had once felt effortless now required effort. By October 1963, they separated. Not publicly, not dramatically, but definitively. The divorce was finalized in August 1964, and unlike many Hollywood separations, it wasn't filled with chaos. There were no public battles, no visible bitterness. They divided what they had built. He gave her the house. She didn't ask for alimony. And somehow, they remained civil, even respectful. In the years that followed, she would still appear in projects connected to him, which said something important. The relationship had ended, but it hadn't been destroyed. Still, for Carolyn, the impact was real. She was 33 years old. Her career was active, but not secure, and the partnership that had once grounded her life was gone. What remained was uncertainty. And then, almost immediately, something new appeared. An opportunity, a role, something that looked, at first, like the answer. A chance to redefine everything, to stabilize her career, to secure her place. But what no one could see at the time was that this role would do something else entirely. It would make her unforgettable, and at the same time, limit everything that came after. Part 4. The role that made her, and took everything back. In 1964, just as one chapter of Carolyn Jones's life quietly ended, another began. At first, it looked like opportunity, the kind every actor hopes for. A role that would bring visibility, consistency, and recognition to a career that had been moving, yes, but never fully stable. The show was The Addams Family, and the character was Morticia. From the moment the series premiered in September 1964, something unusual happened. Morticia wasn't just another television character. She became iconic, elegant, mysterious, unbothered by the world around her. A woman who moved slowly, spoke softly, and carried a quiet authority that made everything she did feel deliberate. She wasn't loud. She didn't need to be, and Carolyn understood her completely. The long black dress, the stillness, the subtle arch of an eyebrow. Every movement was controlled, every expression intentional. It looked effortless, but it wasn't. It required precision, and Carolyn delivered it with a level of commitment that turned Morticia into something unforgettable. The creator of the original cartoons, Charles Addams, had personally wanted her for the role, and once the show aired, it became clear why. She didn't just play Morticia, she defined her. For 2 seasons, across 64 episodes, she lived inside that character. Audiences loved it. The show developed a following that was loyal and growing, and for Carolyn, it finally offered something she had been chasing for years: stability, regular work, consistent visibility, a role people recognized instantly. But Hollywood rarely gives without taking something in return, because as Morticia grew, everything else began to disappear. To the audience, Carolyn Jones was no longer an actress with range. She was Morticia, completely, and that kind of identification comes with a cost. In 1966, the show was suddenly cancelled, not because it failed, not because audiences had turned away, but because of decisions made beyond the screen. Network strategy, shifting priorities, things actors rarely control. And just like that, it ended. For Carolyn, The impact was deeper than expected, not because she thought it would last forever, but because it ended before it had given her enough financial security, enough time to transition into something new, enough space to redefine herself beyond the role. And now, she was left with something complicated: recognition, but no direction. Because when casting directors looked at her, they didn't see possibility. They saw Morticia. The roles that once might have gone to her, complex, layered characters, now went elsewhere. She wasn't being rejected. She was being overlooked. And there's a difference. One is visible. The other is silent. So she turned to the stage, touring productions, theatre work, not as a fallback, but as something she genuinely respected. She had always loved performing live, but even so, it marked a shift, away from the center of the industry, away from where careers expand. And during this period, uncertain, transitional, and quietly difficult, she made another decision, one that would shape the next 7 years of her life. She grew close to a man named Herbert Green, a Broadway conductor, a musical director, someone she had known professionally. At first it seemed natural, comforting even. He was familiar, trusted. And in a time where her career felt unstable, that kind of presence can feel grounding. The relationship deepened, and in 1968, they married. At the time, it didn't raise alarms publicly, but privately, those who knew her felt something wasn't right. Not immediately, but gradually, subtly. There was something about him, his personality, his presence, that unsettled people around her. And what followed would not be dramatic in the way Hollywood stories often are. There were no headlines, no public scandals, no visible collapse. Instead, it was something quieter, something slower, something far more damaging. He asked her to stop acting, not reduce it, not choose better roles. Stop. Completely. And somehow, he convinced her. She moved with him to Palm Springs, a beautiful place, quiet, isolated, far from the industry, far from the life she had spent decades building. At first it may have felt like rest, a break, a pause. But for someone like Carolyn, acting wasn't just work. It was identity. And slowly, that identity began to fade. The connections she had built over years began to weaken, then disappear. The phone stopped ringing. The opportunities went to others. Because in Hollywood, if you're not present, you're replaced. Time moved on, and so did everyone else. 7 years. That's how long she stayed. 7 years away from the center of her own life. She wasn't entirely inactive. She wrote, took occasional roles when allowed. But the career she had fought so hard to build was gone, or at least out of reach. People who saw her during this time noticed the change. She was quieter, less certain. The energy that once defined her, the sharpness, the awareness, the quiet intensity, had softened, not naturally, but gradually, as if something inside her had been dimmed. And the most difficult part? It didn't happen all at once. It happened slowly enough that it almost felt normal, until one day, it didn't. Because beneath everything, the silence, the distance, the absence, there was something that hadn't disappeared, the need to act, the thing that had started when she was 6 years old, the thing that had carried her through loss, rejection, and struggle. It was still there, waiting, and eventually, it became stronger than everything holding her back. In 1977, she made a decision. She left, she ended the marriage, and she returned to Hollywood. But the world she came back to was no longer the same, and neither was she. Part 5. The Return, the Secret, and the Final Choice. When Carolyn Jones returned to Hollywood in 1977, she stepped into a world that had moved on without her. The industry she had once known, the structure, the rhythm, even the faces, had changed. The old studio system was gone. Television had evolved. And the kind of roles that once existed for actresses like her were no longer waiting. She was 46 years old. And in Hollywood, that number carried weight. Not because of ability, but because of perception. The leading roles had shifted to younger faces. The attention had moved elsewhere. And the years she had spent away, 7 long years in Palm Springs, had created a gap that no one ignored. Casting directors noticed it. Producers questioned it. And in an industry built on momentum, a gap like that can feel like a disappearance. But Carolyn didn't return expecting ease. She returned to work. Whatever was available. Whatever allowed her to step back into the world she had once belonged to. And she did what she had always done best. She made every role count. In 1977, she appeared in the landmark television miniseries Roots. It was a massive production, one that reached millions of viewers and became one of the most watched events in television history. And even in a smaller role, Carolyn reminded audiences of something they had nearly forgotten. She could still command the screen. From there, the work continued. Guest appearances, television roles, steady, consistent presence. She appeared in shows like Fantasy Island and The Love Boat, both produced by Aaron Spelling, a detail that carried quiet meaning. Despite everything that had changed between them, he hadn't forgotten her. And when the opportunity came, he brought her back. It wasn't the career she once imagined. It wasn't the center of the spotlight. But it was real. And more importantly, it was hers again. For a time, it seemed like she had rebuilt something solid, not the past, but something new, something sustainable. And then, everything changed again. In March 1981, Carolyn Jones was diagnosed with colon cancer. She was 50 years old. The diagnosis was serious, aggressive. And from the beginning, she understood exactly what it meant. But she made a decision, a very deliberate one. She told almost no one. Her sister knew. A small circle close to her knew. But to the industry, to the people she worked with, to the public, she said nothing. When questions came, she gave a simple answer. Ulcers. Something manageable. Something temporary. It wasn't denial. It was control. She had spent her entire life deciding what the world would see and what it wouldn't. And she wasn't about to change that now. Instead of stepping away, she stepped forward. In 1982, she took on a new role in a CBS daytime drama called Capital. She played Myrna Clegg, a powerful, calculating matriarch at the center of the story. It was the kind of role she had always excelled in, sharp, commanding, layered, and she embraced it completely. There was something almost defiant in the way she worked during this time, because she knew something no one else did. She knew how limited her time was. And still, she showed up, every day, prepared, focused, present. While her body was beginning to fail her, her performance never did. Around this same period, something else entered her life. Not work, not struggle, something quieter, something genuine. She had met a man named Peter Bailey Britton, a British actor. Unlike the relationships that came before, this one unfolded differently. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't built on uncertainty. It was steady, mutual, warm. They spent years together before taking the next step, and in September 1982, they married. Carolyn was 52, and by then, she had been living with cancer for over a year. She knew the reality of it. the prognosis, the direction it was heading. But she chose to marry him anyway, not out of denial, but out of clarity. She wasn't trying to escape the truth. She was choosing something within it, a moment of completeness, a decision to live fully, even while everything was closing in. And those who knew her during that time noticed something remarkable. She didn't withdraw. She didn't collapse under it. She remained herself, sharp, present, engaged, even as the illness progressed, even as it took more from her physically. She kept working. On Capitol, she continued performing as long as she possibly could. Eventually, the effects of the illness became impossible to hide. She required a wheelchair. Her strength diminished. And still, she showed up. There's a story often told by her co-stars that watching her work during those final months didn't feel like routine. It felt like witnessing something rare, a kind of willpower most people never reach. She wasn't working because she had to. She was working because it was who she was, and she held on to that identity until she physically couldn't anymore. In July 1983, Carolyn slipped into a coma, and on August 3rd, 1983, she passed away at her home in West Hollywood. She was 53 years old. In the final months of her life, she had continued to give everything she had, not just to her work, but to the people around her. The cast and crew who slowly came to understand what she had been carrying in silence watched her with a mixture of admiration and grief, because by the time they fully realized, it was almost over. She was laid to rest in California beside her mother. Her sister, who had been there from the very beginning, was there until the end. And for Carolyn, there had always been one simple wish, not for fame, not for recognition, but for something far more human. She wanted to be remembered as someone who brought something good into the world, something lasting, something felt. And in the end, that's exactly what she did. Part 6. What Remains and What It Meant. When a life like Carolyn Jones's comes to an end, what remains is not just a list of roles or a timeline of events. What remains is the pattern, the choices, the quiet moments that never made headlines, but shaped everything. And when you look at her life closely, one thing becomes clear. It was never simple, not in love, not in career, not even in the way she chose to exist in the world. She was married 4 times. Each marriage, in its own way, tells a different part of her story. The first, to Don Donaldson, was brief, almost invisible. A young woman's early attachment formed quickly and ended just as quickly. It left little behind in public memory, but it revealed something essential. Carolyn felt deeply, and when she chose someone, she committed fully. The second marriage, to Aaron Spelling, was different. It had balance. 2 people, both ambitious, both working towards something larger than themselves. In the early years, they moved together, built together, supported each other, and for a time, it worked. But life doesn't always allow 2 people to grow at the same pace. Aaron's career surged forward, television expanded, and he rose with it, while Carolyn, despite her talent, was navigating a more uncertain path. And slowly, that difference created distance, not because of a single moment, but because of many small ones. Still, when it ended, it didn't collapse. There was no bitterness that consumed everything. No destruction. They separated with dignity, and somehow remained connected, which says something about what they had been to each other. The third marriage, to Herbert Green, was the one that changed her the most, not visibly, not in ways that the public could see, but internally, quietly. It took something from her that had always defined her work. For 7 years, she lived away from the industry, away from the life she had built. And during that time, something dimmed. Not her talent, not her ability, but her connection to it. That kind of loss doesn't come all at once. It comes gradually, until one day, you realize something is missing. And by the time she left, there were parts of that life she never fully recovered. But she did return. And that matters, because it tells you something about who she was. She could be pulled away, but not permanently. The fourth marriage, to Peter Bailey Britton, was something else entirely. It came later, after everything, after success, after disappointment, after loss. And it was different, calmer, more equal, more real. She chose it knowing her time was limited, knowing what was coming. And still, she chose it. Not out of denial, but out of clarity. She chose connection, even in the face of an ending. And that choice might say more about her than anything else, because Carolyn Jones was never someone who stopped reaching, even when it would have been easier to step back, even when life gave her reasons to. There's something else that defines her story, something quieter, but just as important. She was private, deeply private. She didn't share everything, didn't explain every struggle, didn't allow the world to see her in pieces. She chose what to reveal and what to protect. The early marriage, the missed opportunity that could have changed her career, the years in Palm Springs, even her illness. She carried all of it, with control. And there's a strength in that, but also a cost, because the version of her that the world saw, the elegant, composed, almost untouchable figure, was only part of the truth. Beneath that was a woman who had faced loss, uncertainty, sacrifice, and decisions that didn't always lead where she hoped. She wasn't just Morticia, though that role would define her in the public eye. And in many ways, it was deserved. Her performance was precise, timeless, still remembered, still referenced. She created something that lasted. But it was only one part of what she did. There was also the performance in The Bachelor Party, 8 minutes that earned her an Academy Award nomination. A moment of brilliance so concentrated that it still surprises people. There were the films, the stage work, the roles that showed her range, even when the industry struggled to place her. She was not limited. She was misread. And that happens more often than people realize, to actors, to artists, to people. In the end, what matters isn't just what someone achieves, it's what they continue to give, even when the circumstances change. And Carolyn Jones gave everything she had. Until the very end, she worked through illness, she kept showing up, she kept performing, not because she needed recognition, but because it was who she was. And when the time came, she left quietly, the way she had lived, without spectacle, without announcement, just gone, but not forgotten. Because what she left behind wasn't just a body of work, it was a presence, a feeling, a memory that stayed with people long after the screen went dark. Before she passed, she had expressed one simple wish, something she wanted to be remembered for. Not awards, not fame, not even the roles. She wanted it to be said, that she gave joy to the world. And when you look at everything, the performances, the effort, the life she built despite everything that stood in her way, it becomes clear. She wasn't wrong.